Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. This is my first presentation on using IBL techniques, and I didn't even know what IBL was about a year ago. I taught this semester for the first time. So actually, I was thinking about talking about two things in this talk. One, how do you get somebody who's pessimistic and conservative to do IBL? So, and two, number two is, what did I actually do? So in the history of math class. So I thought I'd give you a little insight on what a pessimist conservative feels when they start thinking, I want to do IBL, just to begin with. Just to let you know, just give you an idea, I got this 2 years ago. I'd never touched one before. That's how conservative I am and how slow I am to change. I didn't trust them, but now I bank with them. So I do change, it just takes me a long time. And thinking of switching to an IBL approach was extremely scary. When I thought about it, I thought, I don't have the time. I have things that take up my time. My time munchers are similar to yours. In some sense, I have grants and other things that I need to deal with, papers. I also have 6 kids under the age of 16. That's another big time muncher. And I was like, I cannot commit to this idea. But I've been slowly realizing that really I'm just a good teacher, the way I was doing it before. My students, I'm good at explaining and demonstrating. My students walked out knowing the material, but were uninspired. And that was something I could not deny because I had, too much data to back it up. So I realized that I needed to do something different. I saw great teachers, and I don't just mean funny, I got the funny part. I saw great teachers that inspired their students. I can get good evals, I can do the funny thing and I can teach well, but they didn't walk out inspired to do math. And I saw teachers do that, and I thought, man, I need to be better. I'm doing something fundamentally wrong. And then my university hired Dr. Angie Hodge, and that sort of made me stumble upon IBL whether I wanted to or not, because she is big time into IBL. And so she did a presentation, and I thought, wow, what they are saying, what they are claiming that IBL does is exactly what I want my students to be able to do. I want them to be empowered. I want them to be seeing learning as something that they own. I want them to be problem solvers, not just more rote. And so I was like, the perfect storm. I was willing to commit. So I said, okay, I'm going to apply for a grant. And I applied for a grant from the Academy of Inquiry-Based Learning. And I thought, there's nothing like guilt to get you going, right? I thought, if I start procrastinating, they paid me. I've got to start doing it. So I was like, I'm going to do this. And I dove in, and this was like September, and I thought, I got to make it to January is when the history of math class starts. That's the one I'm going to try because I needed to revamp the class anyway. So I'm going to try it in that class. So I started, what I did is I read a book. I read the Moore Method, A Pathway of Learner-Centered Instruction. I only went to one day of a seminar, and truthfully, my interpretation of IBL has, as I'm in the conference, I'm realizing I didn't quite get it, but I kind of got it. And so most of the things I'm going to talk about are IBL-like. But by reading this book, I sort of gleaned out ideas. Okay, what are things that make an IBL classroom or a Moore Method classroom work? And what I came up with was several ideas. 1, you need empowerment. 2, you need self-critique and peer critique. 3, you need authentic experiences. 4, you need environments that were trusting. You needed expectations of greatness. You needed them to work, and the ability to correct and revise and come back. And you needed peer teaching. These were all ideas I thought, okay, I somehow need to incorporate these. I journaled my thoughts as I was going throughout the fall semester, saying, okay, I'm reading this book every week. I'm reading a few hours. And I kept doing this. Hit mid-November, realized I only had a month and a half to go, and I had no idea what I was going to do, and conservative approach kicked in, and I started panicking, realizing I don't know what I'm going to do, and I said, this is insane. Then I remember they had paid me to do it, and so I started getting really nervous about it. And so then I was like, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do. I mean, I've got ideas, but how do I really make it work? Well, thankfully I had a mentor, and I think that's a really good approach, to have a mentor. And I sort of addressed some of my concerns with my mentor, and she said, keep working at it. Typical IBL approach. I said, okay. And I sat down, and I remember I had an epiphany, a moment. I was sitting there, and actually, of all places, in church. And I'm sitting there, and they said something, and it was just like, boom! I can do this. It just hit me. You know, of course, this is true mathematicians. We think of math and teaching everywhere, right? It's just like, boom, it hit me. And I was all like, I can do this. And what I thought of was, why not have the teachers, because most of them were teachers. The 90% of the people in my class were planning on being teachers. Why not have them teach the class? That's not exciting in and of itself. People do this all the time. But expect them to do so using IBL techniques. I thought, I don't even know how to do it, but that's okay. This is expecting greatness of them. So if you want to hand those out. Okay, so I thought, is this empowering? Yeah, it should be empowering, right? You know, I mean, is it going to be, is there an ability to incorporate self and peer critique? Sure, there should be, right? Is it peer teaching? Yes. Is it authentic? Yes. I went down the list of things I had marked off, and I thought, yeah, all of these fit. So that's what I did. Now, to make this work, what I did is I created a rubric for them. I call it the teacher rubric. And it incorporates at least, I think, IBL-like principles in it. And I said to them, when you teach, this is how you're going to judge yourself. And this is how I'm going to judge you. And this is how your students are going to judge you. We want you to hit every single one of these principles. And you can read them. I don't have time to go over them. But there's a T principle for trustworthy sources. That's because it's a history of math class. There's an E principle for engaging and an E principle for enjoyment. There's a C principle for challenging them and expecting them to be thinking about hard and interesting mathematics. So what happened was the students then were asked to teach 3 lessons throughout the semester. One lesson was in a small group setting. This was one of the things that my mentor said, hey, get them presenting early. I hadn't thought about this. She said, even if it's in a small group, that'll get them their ability to think about their presenting and their nerves over with quickly. So I had them present in small groups to begin with. And then those small groups then presented to the entire class as a group 2 other times. And what they did is they gave historical readings, assigned homework, gave feedback on the homework, wrote test questions, revised and retaught things when they had to. I mean, I tried to make it as authentic as possible. They were responsible for their students' learning. To make it more authentic, when we had tests, how their students did on the tests impacted their test grade. That was, of course, the most controversial decision of the course. They didn't complain as much as you might think, but they did a little bit. 80% of their grade was their own test grade, and 20% was how their students did on their portion of the test. One of the things that I thought I needed to incorporate better, because I was more of a traditional teacher, is how do I make it so that they're learning, but in an open environment, not an environment that's just high expectations, high stress. And so one of the things we did is after every class, we spent 10 minutes debriefing. And they started critiquing each other and saying, here's what you did that I liked. Here's what I didn't quite understand, which then allowed them to come back, reteach, or learn from it. Let's see here. Where was I? Okay. So, so on the test, to make sure that they asked good test questions, I told them I was going to bump the test grade up a bit if they asked good and appropriate questions. If they asked questions that were too easy, if they were basically lollipops and Mickey Mouse, then I would lower the test a little bit. So this helped them not just give questions that weren't appropriate or weren't challenging for their students. And if their test questions were too hard, I might raise the test grade a little bit just to adjust for that, because I think they were over trying, which is, I mean, I guess you'd rather err on that side than err on the side of too weak. One of the things that, well, I guess that's just the nuts and bolts. I'm not sure I covered all the nuts and bolts of what I did, but that's sort of the nuts and bolts of what I did in the class. The other thing that I did is I had them, like I said, I had them evaluate themselves and evaluate their peers on every one of the teaching rubrics. So if you look on the back, you'll see guidelines I gave them for their evaluations, and you'll see I did it with a hotspot setup where they could do their evaluations quickly, because I wanted them to evaluate on every single one of the guidelines in the teacher rubric, which would take a long time. And what I did is I set up a hotspot thing where they could just click. And so it ended up taking about 3 minutes to do the evaluation, which means I got a ton of feedback. So when I was able to, at the end of a teaching presentation, I was able to go to the student and say, what do you think you deserve? And I did do this. I said, why do you think you deserve this grade based on the teaching rubric? And here's what your student said. Here's what I observed. And so they were able to get a wealth of information back. And I think that made it even more authentic, which was inspiring for them. So real quickly, I have 5 minutes. Here's what happened. So you heard what I tried to do. They learned the history of math that was covered in the class pretty well. They were engaged. They got A's and B's on the tests. The tests were pretty good questions for the most part. They weren't really different than the types of questions I asked in previous semesters, and they did pretty good of the math that was covered. I think that's an important part. We'll talk about that in a minute. They took the teacher rubric and the teaching assignments. They just loved it. They thought they were extremely engaged in doing it. I'll give you an example of something that happened. One of the principles on here is be ready. I wanted them to get multiple layers of feedback before they presented. And so one of the groups of 4 had a teacher who was actually a 6th grade teacher in our history of math class, a little odd, but she taught at a advanced school, and she taught with the honors kids. So she had some really smart 6th graders. The group was doing a presentation on Cantor and different infinities. They went to the 6th grade class and taught them why the reals were uncountable. And they got it. That's how they got ready for the class that they were going to present for us. I thought that was pretty awesome. But of course, sometimes they flopped. Sometimes the lessons didn't go well. And so, similar to inquiry-based learning, when you're just studying math, this was studying math and also studying teaching, really, when you get down to it. Similar to that, we had ways for them to come back and reteach. Sometimes it happened like the end of the lesson, right at the very end. This didn't happen often, but it happened once, and so I had to adjust and say, okay, just so you have some closure, we're going to go into the next ones, and I had to do some schedule adjusting, because you don't want to have them end on a, wow, that stunk note. The feedback sessions and the learning became so self-driven and peer-driven that literally I became obsolete by about halfway through the semester. That's probably a good thing. I don't know. So they had concerns about the grading policy that I talked about, but not anywhere near as much as I would have thought, because they wanted to be teachers, so they realized that this was, I guess they accepted it as being sincere and being something that they needed. There was like 1 out of the class of 12 that by the end of the semester was still frustrated about it. If you look at the rubric, the trustworthy sources, how to bring that into the actual lesson, the lessons were math lessons. They weren't history lessons. They had a history reading, and then they did math from the history. How to bring in the trustworthy sources was challenging to them. They didn't do a good job with that in general, and the adapting principle was challenging to them. They felt that they never did well with the adapting principle, just in case you decide to use this rubric. Like most new teachers, like most new IBL teachers, I hated my loss of involvement for about a month. But I stuck to it. Angie warned me I would hate it, and I did. And then after about a month, I started seeing what was going on, and then I got over it. I was okay with it. The teachers themselves made many of the mistakes new teachers make when they were teaching. They were underprepared at times, and it showed. And they knew, I mean, you know, that feeling of there's nowhere to hide. Everyone knows that you weren't prepared. They got it. They felt it at times. They gave away too much help. So many new teachers do this, and they did it. And what was interesting on this one is there was one experience where they kind of led the class by the nose to this idea, and the class said, we don't want that during the feedback session. And so then the next time they taught, they did a much better job. So that was good. And they sometimes did the other way. They assumed that they had too much background knowledge, and so they had to slow down. They started doubting their ability to teach, actually. I didn't actually resolve this. By the end of the semester, many of these new teachers kind of realized they weren't good at certain things in teaching, which probably is a good thing for new teachers because most of the time they seem to be naively confident until they hit a brick wall. So now I guess the way I did the class, they're hitting the brick wall as an undergraduate, which may be better than hitting it in their second year or first year of teaching. But now they're maybe hungry for their methods classes. I don't know. They definitely felt some angst as the course went on. The first teaching experience, it was all like, oh, good job, good job, good job. But by the middle, they were giving each other real and authentic feedback. And they realized that they weren't great at certain things, although they were great at others. They bonded together in ways that were way stronger than I expected. I know they're going to keep working together, actually, because they really worked close together. I should have mixed the groups up. I didn't mix them up. I had the same group teach both lessons, other than the first introduction lesson. I realized I should have mixed them because there was a little bit of personal problems going on in one of the three groups. And so I'm out. Yeah, okay, and then that's it. All right, so time for questions. Yeah. Oh, hold on. I know I need to do this.
So you referred to yourself in your abstract and at the beginning as being a skeptic.
Definitely.
Can you explain a little more what it is that you were skeptical of? Were you skeptical of your own ability to do this, or were you skeptical of whether the techniques would work in themselves with students in teaching? What was the nature of your skepticism, and how has that evolved? Where are you now with regard to the things you were skeptical about?
That's a great question. I did want to talk a little bit about that aspect in this presentation. I was definitely skeptical of my own ability to do it because I was skeptical that I would have the time, and I was skeptical that I was just skeptical that I'd be able to do it. Like, I was worried. You know, I'm a pessimist, but pessimists are okay. You know, optimists invented the airplane and pessimists the parachutes. I don't apologize for being a pessimist. I just am, and that's how I see things. So that's okay. Yeah. So I was that way. I was kind of scared of it. I saw it work. So I'm actually even considering. I mean, I'll continue doing it with the history of math class, refining it. So now I'm even considering doing it with the other classes I teach. So. And I'm scared to death of it, so anyway. But at least I saw it work. I have some engagement in it. Other questions? Did I? Oh, yeah, okay. So anyway, I guess Dr. Hodge teaches at the university I teach at, and if you paid close attention to her talk, you may realize that what I'm saying, I might be on a sinking boat as far as history of math goes. So I don't know if we'll continue teaching it or not. But if we do, I'll keep using IBL. At the very least, I hope that my students might use some of the techniques they've learned that the rubric sort of tried to help them learn and use themselves. And of course, that's sort of maybe naive, but I can expect great things of them. Can't I?